There are several tasks given to interns in the sports department at KSL. One of them is logging games. This involves watching the game and writing down the time of day important plays take place. This may seem like a simple job, but it is actually very important. Sundays are a busy day for everyone in the sports department. Producers and anchors are working hard preparing for the upcoming show. They do not have time to go through and watch every play of every game. Logging games allows for anyone to quickly look at the log sheet in order to pull highlights. I enjoyed this task mostly because I was technically working while watching these football games. Minutes after a game ends, a story can be cut and ready to be put on the website or on live TV. Spending less time pulling highlights also gives you the ability to add to the overall story. If music needs to be added, or if a play needs to be shown in slow motion, time can be spent adding elements instead of just worrying about getting all of the important plays. This specific game was the Super Bowl between the Ravens and 49ers. Instead of watching the entire game, the person who pulled the highlights knew when the Ravens scored early, when the Ravens scored on a kickoff, saw when the lights went out in the Superdome, and were able to watch the 49ers make a comeback only to fall short at the very end. And that is logging games. Another story I was able to help with was finding the best dunks in Utah Jazz history. I was sent way back to the archives and began watching old Jazz games from the 80s looking for incredible dunks. Once again, I did not feel like I was working because I was just simply watching basketball games. When I would find a dunk, I would record it onto the media encoder. This is where we would gather all of the footage. Once the plays are encoded, they are put into Adobe Premiere and ready to be edited. This was the first chance I had to learn about editing and seeing exactly how it worked behind the scenes. I was the one who began the story, but other members of the sports department took over and found the remaining dunks after I was gone. This turned out to be a good story because it was right in the middle of the Jazz season. Of course, most KSL viewers have some interest in the Jazz. Because it wasn't as successful of a year, this story allowed for Jazz fans to have something to cheer about. I personally was able to see some of the great Jazz players from the past who I had never heard from, and I imagine other fans were taken back to some of the glory days. I thought dunking was not as big in the NBA as it is today, but the former players could definitely get above the rim. Another task is archiving games. KSL has someone go get live footage of home games instead of just getting the highlights from another source. In order to have a library of all of these games, they must be edited to only show the main game storylines. These archives are then saved so months or years later, any game can easily be found. As an intern, you watch the game and make necessary cuts, showing the best plays and making it easy to know exactly how the game went. For example, if you archive a Utah Jazz game and a player ties a team record, you then can go back and get footage of when the record was first set. Archiving can take some time, but for anyone who enjoys watching sports highlights, it can be enjoyable. Some nights I would sit and archive for almost the full 8 hours I was there. I mostly did Jazz games, but did some BYU and Utah basketball. When I saw archived games being used in actual shows, it allowed me to realize how important archiving really was. This game between St. Mary's and BYU came down to a shot on the last play. BYU was heartbroken after a half-court shot was made and their victory was taken on their home court. KSL Sports produces a wide variety of stories. This past April, current Carolina Panther and former Utah Ute Steve Smith was being added to the Hall of Fame at the University of Utah. The producers thought it would be a good idea to interview Smith and talk about his old playing days in Salt Lake. This is where the archives once again came in handy. This was my last day, and I wanted to show I was going to work hard until the end and show all that I had learned. I was able to go back to the 1998 and 1999 seasons and find every single catch Steve Smith made at Utah. This was a long process because of the amount of catches that he had, but it really helped the producer who was busy with the interview and other duties. After I finished, there was about 20 minutes of just Steve Smith catches. This took me a few hours, but with how busy the other guys were, they said it would have taken them days. The producer then took clips he thought were the best and added them to the interview, as well as current highlights of Steve playing for the Panthers. The interview aired with all of the highlights and was a very successful story. Watching all of the plays Smith made while at Utah really made me appreciate how good of a player he really was. Only playing for 2 years, Smith is one of the best receivers in Utah history. He has had a long, successful career, and I am glad I got the chance to look at what he was able to accomplish. I was very grateful for all of the things I was able to help with at KSL and had a very enjoyable time doing my part.